Today I want to talk about climate change, but let's make it personal. Who's actually causing the climate to change? You! This incredibly complex question apparently has some very simple answers, if you believe the YouTube comments I get.
Population growth obviously leads to emissions growth.
It's clearly rich people causing climate change.
I'm pretty sure it's all because Mercury is back in retrograde.
Are any of these people right? Are all of them right? Let's find out. Although, spoiler alert, we can't blame Mercury's grade for this one, no matter how retro it might be. I'm Adam, a climate scientist with a PhD from the University of Oxford, sharing what you need to know about climate change. And my PhD is in atmospheric physics, so when I hear people saying who is and isn't to blame for climate change, my first reaction is, show me the numbers. Let's start with the one that seems like the biggest no-brainer. More people equals more emissions. This appears to make sense, since
everyone has a carbon footprint, so more footprints means more carbon.
Yeah, sure, but how much more carbon? Fertility rates are generally highest for people with low income, and low income means low carbon footprint. That's something that's going to come up a lot in this episode. But I think people like me in higher income countries often don't appreciate what a huge difference this makes. An average person in a low income country emits as much in an entire year as an average American does in one single week. Data scientist Hannah Ritchie asked what would happen to global emissions if we suddenly clicked our fingers and added 1 billion people to this low-income group. Well, global emissions would go from this all the way up to this. And if you're struggling to tell the difference, that's because this represents 37 billion tons of carbon dioxide, and this represents 37.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide. 1 billion people added, and barely a dent in global carbon emissions.
But growing population combined with lifting people out of poverty, that's the real problem.
Interesting point. Interesting, but misleading. One study found that if we raised every single person in the world out of extreme poverty, that would raise global emissions by less than 1%. Now, obviously, all of this is a bit of a simplification. Not all population growth is happening in low-income countries, and ideally we'd like to do more to improve people's lives than just ending extreme poverty.
Plus, more people also impacts things like water scarcity.
For sure, but the crucial message here is that the stats simply don't back up the simple idea that a major driving force behind climate change is population growth. And I've heard a lot of people making this claim.
With a growing global population creating ever-increasing demand on the planet's finite resources.
More people, higher CO2 emissions. It's a very simple equation.
This fundamental source of all our problems, particularly our environmental problems, is population growth.
Okay, well, someone's got to be causing all that climate change. Who is it? Well, low income means low carbon footprint, which means high income means high carbon footprint. Exactly. Let's break it down. One study from last year investigated the carbon footprints of people from around the world. It found that the poorest 50% of the world's population emitted just 12% of the world's carbon dioxide. Meanwhile, the richest 10% of the world's population emitted a whopping 48% of the world's total, which is such a staggering stat that it bears repeating. This time with an analogy. Let's represent the world's population with these 10 beautiful people, and the world's emissions with this delicious cake. One person would be eating half the cake by themselves, meanwhile 5 people would be sharing a single slice.
Whoa!
As the study puts it in the very first sentence, all humans contribute to climate change, but not equally. Now, before you get the guillotines out, it's worth emphasizing that the richest 10% in a global context means anyone earning roughly more than $40,000 per year. So we're not just talking about multi-millionaires here. The study also looked at who has contributed to emissions increases since 1990.
So who's caused the world to consume the most extra cake?
Well, the study found that the richest 1% of the world's population has contributed almost a quarter to emissions growth. Honestly, this is a video where I was expecting to say, well, everyone's right to a certain extent if you look at the data, but that's just not what the data is showing. Rich people are contributing a huge amount to climate change, poor people having babies, not so much. But despite this, if I had $1 for every single time someone blamed climate change on population growth, well, then I'd be incredibly rich, which would make me a major driver of climate change. Honestly, all of this seems like a way for the richest people, who are the most responsible, to shift the blame to the poorest people who are contributing the least to the problem.
There's just too many of you.
So what do we do with all this information? Ultimately, to stop the world from heating up, we need to stop emitting carbon dioxide entirely. That means most people around the world need to dramatically shrink their carbon footprint. Now, a lot of this needs to come from structural changes, for example, decarbonizing our electricity systems. But we also need to acknowledge that all humans contribute to climate change, but not equally. If you fly many times a year, or you eat red meat many times a week, well then you're probably consuming more than your fair share of the carbon dioxide cake. And the truth is that individual action on climate change matters a huge amount if you're super rich. If you're super rich and you cut your carbon footprint by 90%, that would make a bigger difference than if anyone else did that.
So how do we do that?
Well, there are all sorts of ideas. For example, we could cut lifestyle emissions by making frequent flyers pay more. Or we can make investing in polluting industries less profitable through divestment campaigns. And of course, shifting taxation could redistribute some of that wealth so that it combats climate change rather than contributes to it. And if you happen to have loads of money and you're watching this, there's a whole study about the huge impact that you could have. Link in the description below. Though if you've got all that money kicking around, you might as well also become a ClimateAdam patron. Look, climate change is unfair, is disproportionately caused by the richest people, and is disproportionately felt by the poorest people. Combating climate change means combating both of these problems. Okay, but how do we stop climate change disproportionately affecting poor people? Well, one of the key approaches is called loss and damage, an incredibly controversial topic that negotiators have been arguing about for decades. Find out why and what it is in my video over here. Okay, until next time. Bye. That's a cat.